The autumn air carried the scent of freshly turned earth as Callaghan stood motionless at the edge of the grave, her tears long since dried by the harsh Wyoming wind that whipped her black mourning dress around her ankles. The last shovelful of dirt had been placed over her father's casket nearly an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave, even as the small gathering of townspeople had gradually dispersed with awkward condolences and averted eyes. Now, as the October sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, she was truly alone. Diana clutched her father's worn Bible to her chest, the only real possession of his she had kept. Everything else would be sold to pay the debts he'd accumulated in his final years. The small ranch they'd struggled to maintain would be auctioned off within the week. At 22, she was now homeless, penniless, and without family in this unforgiving territory. "Miss," the deep voice startled her from behind, the temperature's dropping fast. "I'd be honored to walk you back to town." Diana turned slowly, facing a tall figure silhouetted against the dimming sky. He stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand, revealing thick chestnut hair that caught the last golden rays of sunlight. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, a simple cotton shirt, leather vest, and denim pants tucked into well-used boots. A gun belt hung at his hip, but there was nothing threatening in his stance. "Thank you, but I'm quite capable of finding my way," she replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I've no doubt of that, madam, but it's a hard day for anybody, and no one should have to walk it alone." His face came into clearer view as he stepped forward, strong-jawed with kind eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. "Cole Brennan, at your service." Diana hesitated. She had seen him at the funeral, standing back from the others, hat held respectfully against his chest. He wasn't from Timber Creek. She would have recognized him. But there was something in his eyes, a gentleness that contrasted with his weathered appearance. "Diana Callaghan," she finally responded, though she suspected he already knew. In a town the size of Timber Creek, news traveled faster than a prairie fire. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Brennan, but..." A distant howl cut through the air, followed by another. "Wolves, coming down from the hills earlier than usual this year." Cole's expression remained neutral. "It'll be dark soon, Miss Callaghan. Those wolves sound hungry, and it's a fair walk back to town." Diana glanced over her shoulder at her father's grave one last time. There was nothing more she could do here. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her alone, with nowhere to go but Mrs. Winthrop's boarding house, where she'd rented a small room with the last of her money. "Very well, Mr. Brennan." She finally nodded, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Just Cole, if you don't mind," he said, offering his arm. Diana hesitated before lightly placing her gloved hand on his forearm. As they began the walk toward town, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky above them. "I'm sorry about your father," Cole said after they had walked in silence for several minutes. "I didn't know him personally, but I've heard he was a good man." "He was," Diana replied softly. "He tried his best after my mother passed. Ranching wasn't in his blood, he was a bookkeeper by trade. But he wanted to give me a different life than the one we had back east." Cole nodded. "That kind of courage is rare, coming out here, starting fresh." "What brings you to Timber Creek, Mr. Brennan Cole?" Diana asked, changing the subject. She didn't want to dwell on memories that were still too raw. "Work, primarily. I've been hired by the Cattlemen's Association to help with some troubles they've been having." "You're not a regular cowhand, then?" A smile touched his lips. "No, madam. I was for many years, but now I mostly handle security matters. Rustlers have been hitting the ranches hard this past season." Diana had heard whispers about the cattle thefts. Several of the larger ranches had lost significant portions of their herds, and tensions were high. "Mr. Hollister mentioned hiring someone, she said, referencing one of the wealthiest ranchers in the territory. I didn't realize it would be an outsider. Sometimes an outsider sees things differently, Cole replied. No existing loyalties or grudges to cloud judgment. They walked in companionable silence for a while longer, the lights of Timber Creek gradually coming into view. The small frontier town consisted of just one main street with various businesses, a general store, saloon, hotel, and assorted other establishments necessary for a remote community. "If you don't mind my asking," Cole said as they approached the outskirts of town, "what will you do now?" Deanna stiffened slightly. It was a personal question, but one she'd been asking herself repeatedly. "I have some skills as a seamstress," she replied. "Mrs. Thompson at the general store mentioned she might have worked for me, and I can read and write well enough to perhaps find employment as a clerk or teacher's assistant." Cole nodded. Timber Creek could use more educated folks. Too many can barely sign their names. They reached the modest two-story building that served as Mrs. Winthrop's boarding house. A lamp glowed in the front window, the only welcoming sight Deanna had seen all day. "Thank you for walking me back," Deanna said, withdrawing her hand from his arm. "It was my pleasure, Miss Callaghan." Cole replaced his hat. "If you need anything at all." "That's very kind, but I'll manage." Her tone was perhaps sharper than intended, pride rising to the surface. She'd endured loss before and survived. This would be no different, Cole seemed to understand. He simply nodded, stepped back, and tipped his hat. "Good night, then." Deanna watched him walk away, his tall figure gradually blending into the darkness. For a brief moment, she felt the strange urge to call him back, to not be alone with her grief for just a little longer. Instead, she turned and climbed the steps to the boarding house, her future as uncertain as the vast Wyoming territory stretching beyond the town's borders. Inside, Mrs. Winthrop was waiting, her plump face creased with concern. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, enveloping Deanna in a warm embrace that smelled of fresh bread and lavender. "I've kept some stew warm for you. You must eat something." "Thank you, Mrs. Winthrop, but I'm not hungry." Deanna attempted to move toward the stairs. "Nonsense," the older woman insisted. "I won't have you wasting away under my roof. Your father would want you to keep up your strength." The mention of her father brought a fresh wave of grief, but Deanna allowed herself to be led to the small dining room where a bowl of beef stew and a slice of bread awaited. She sat down mechanically and began to eat, not tasting the food but acknowledging the practical necessity of nourishment. "I saw you walking with Mr. Brennan," Mrs. Winthrop remarked as she poured Deanna a cup of tea. "He seems a decent sort. Quiet, keeps to himself, but polite. Paid for 2 weeks in advance." "He's staying here?" Deanna asked, looking up from her bowl. "Room at the end of the hall. Says he'll be in town for a while dealing with ranch business." Mrs. Winthrop sat across from Deanna. "You know, I could use some help around here. The arthritis in my hands makes changing linens difficult these days." Deanna recognized the offer for what it was, not charity exactly, but an opportunity born of compassion. "I would appreciate the work, Mrs. Winthrop, but I insist on a fair arrangement. I won't accept special treatment." "Wouldn't dream of offering it," the older woman replied with a knowing smile. 6 hours a day, room and board included, plus $2 a week. That's what I paid the Jameson girl before she married that freight driver. It wasn't much, but it would keep Deanna from immediate destitution. She nodded gratefully. "I accept, thank you." After finishing her meal, Deanna climbed the narrow staircase to her small room. It contained just a single bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers, but it was clean and warm. Through the thin walls, she could hear the occasional creak of floorboards as other boarders moved about their rooms. Sitting on the edge of the bed, Deanna finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. Tears came silently at first, then in racking sobs that she muffled with her pillow. Her father had been her only family, her anchor in a world that had already taken her mother and younger brother to influenza years before. Now she was truly alone. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Deanna's last thoughts were of kind eyes and a steady voice saying, "No one should have to walk it alone." Dawn arrived with a persistent knocking at Deanna's door. She rose, disoriented, still wearing her black dress from the previous day, now hopelessly wrinkled. "Deanna, dear," Mrs. Winthrop called, "there's hot water for washing and breakfast will be ready shortly. Mr. Thompson from the general store is here to see you." Hastily splashing water on her face and pinning up her dark hair, Deanna changed into her second-best dress, a simple blue cotton with modest lace trim at the collar. She hurried downstairs to find Elijah Thompson, the elderly proprietor of Timber Creek's general store, waiting in the parlor. "Miss Callaghan," he greeted her, standing awkwardly with his hat in hand. "I hope I'm not intruding on your morning." "Not at all, Mr. Thompson. I appreciate you coming." Deanna gestured for him to sit. "I'll bring coffee," Mrs. Winthrop announced, disappearing toward the kitchen. "I'll be direct, Miss Callaghan," Thompson began once they were seated. "Your father's debts to my store amount to nearly $40. Diana's heart sank. It was more than she had expected. "However," he continued, "I respected your father greatly. He was an honest man caught in difficult circumstances. I'd like to propose an arrangement." "I'm listening," Deanna said cautiously. "My wife has been wanting help in the store, particularly with the fabric and notions section. We've heard you have skill with a needle. If you could work 3 days a week, I would consider the debt settled after 3 months." It was a generous offer considering the amount owed. Deanna nodded gratefully. "That's very kind, Mr. Thompson. I accept." "Excellent. Perhaps you could start tomorrow, 10 o'clock. After Thompson left, Deanna sat drinking the coffee Mrs. Winthrop had brought, contemplating how quickly her life was rearranging itself. Between the boarding house work and the general store, she would be busy but sheltered and fed. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was a start. The sound of boots on the porch drew her attention to the window. Cole Brennan was descending the steps, speaking with another man tall, expensively dressed, with a silver-handled walking stick. Deanna recognized him as Randall Hollister, owner of the largest cattle operation in the territory. Their conversation appeared serious, with Hollister gesturing emphatically while Cole listened, his expression unreadable. As if sensing her gaze, Cole glanced toward the window. Deanna stepped back quickly, embarrassed to be caught watching. When she risked another look, both men were mounting horses, Hollister on a magnificent black stallion, Cole on a sturdy chestnut gelding. "Handsome man, that Cole Brennan," Mrs. Winthrop commented, appearing beside Deanna with such suddenness that she jumped. "I hardly noticed," Deanna lied. The older woman responded with evident disbelief. "Well, when you're done not noticing him, there are linens to be changed in rooms 3 and 4. Deanna spent the day learning the rhythms of the boarding house, changing beds, sweeping floors, and helping with laundry. The physical work was a relief, keeping her hands busy and her mind occupied. By evening, her back ached and her fingers were raw from scrubbing, but she felt a small sense of accomplishment. Cole didn't return for dinner, nor did Deanna see him the following day, as she divided her time between the boarding house and her first afternoon at Thompson's general store. Mrs. Thompson proved to be an exacting but fair employer, instructing Deanna in the organization of the fabric inventory and introducing her to regular customers. It was nearly closing time when the bell above the door jingled, and Cole Brennan entered the store. His clothes were dusty from the trail, and he appeared tired but nodded politely to Mrs. Thompson before approaching the counter where Diana was measuring calico for Mrs. Miller, the blacksmith's wife. "Miss Callaghan," he greeted her, waiting patiently while she completed the transaction. "Mr. Brennan," Diana acknowledged once Mrs. Miller had left. "How may I help you?" "I need a few supplies," he said, placing a small list on the counter. It contained basic necessities: coffee, sugar, tobacco, and ammunition. Diana gathered the items efficiently, aware of his gaze following her movements. When she returned to the counter, he was examining a display of pocket watches. "These are new," he commented. "Fine craftsmanship." "They arrived on yesterday's stage," Diana replied. "Mr. Thompson is quite proud of them." Cole selected one silver with an engraved cover. "I'll take this as well." Diana wrapped his purchases carefully in brown paper. "Will there be anything else?" "Yes," Cole said, his voice lowered slightly. "Information if you're willing to share it." Diana looked up, surprised. "What kind of information?" "I understand your father's ranch bordered the north section of Hollister's property." "That's correct." "Did he ever mention problems with Hollister? Boundary disputes, water rights, anything of that nature?" Diana hesitated. Her father had indeed complained about Hollister's men moving boundary markers and diverting water from the creek that ran through both properties. But discussing such matters seemed disloyal somehow. "My father kept his business to himself," she finally replied. Cole studied her face for a moment, then nodded as if he'd read her thoughts. "I understand. Thank you for your help, Miss Callaghan." As he gathered his purchases, Diana found herself asking, "Is there trouble with Mr. Hollister?" "Not specifically," Cole answered carefully. "I'm just gathering information about all the ranches affected by the rustling. Your father's was one of them, I believe." "Yes, we lost 8 head last spring, a significant portion of our small herd." "Did the sheriff investigate?" Diana gave a bitter laugh. "Sheriff Dawson is more interested in keeping the peace with wealthy ranchers than solving crimes against smaller operations." "I see." Cole's expression darkened. "Thank you for your candor, Miss Callaghan. Good evening." After he left, Mrs. Thompson approached with raised eyebrows. "That man has been asking questions all over town. Some folks are getting nervous." "What kind of questions?" Diana asked. "About the rustling, land disputes, who gets along with whom, the kind of questions that stir up trouble." Mrs. Thompson shook her head disapprovingly. "Handsome he may be, but I'd keep my distance if I were you." Diana felt her cheeks warm. "I assure you, Mrs. Thompson, I have no personal interest in Mr. Brennan." "Of course not, dear," the older woman replied with a knowing smile. "Now help me close up shop. There's a social at the church tomorrow evening, harvest celebration. You should attend." "I'm in mourning," Diana protested. "Your father wouldn't want you sitting alone in your room. Besides, it's an opportunity to connect with potential employers." The Reverend mentioned the school might need an assistant. Diana knew Mrs. Thompson was right about seeking employment opportunities, though the thought of socializing so soon after her father's death felt inappropriate. Still, practical necessity outweighed traditional mourning protocols in frontier towns. "Perhaps I will attend," she conceded. The following evening, Diana dressed in her one good dress that wasn't black, a modest gray cotton with small pearl buttons. She had removed the fancier trim to make it more appropriate for her mourning period, but kept a simple lace collar for respectability. The church was brightly lit when she arrived, lanterns illuminating the path to the door. Inside, tables had been arranged with autumn decorations, dried corn husks, colorful gourds, and bowls of apples. A small group of local musicians played cheerful tunes in the corner, though no one was dancing out of respect for the church setting. Deanna was immediately greeted by several townswomen, their sympathy evident but mercifully not overstated. She was directed toward the refreshment table where punch and various homemade treats were arranged. "Miss Callaghan." The deep voice behind her was becoming familiar. Deanna turned to find Cole Brennan, dressed more formally than she had previously seen him, in a clean white shirt and dark waistcoat. "Mr. Brennan, I didn't expect to see you here. Reverend Wilson invited me personally, said it would be a good way to meet the community." He glanced around the room. "I'm not much for social gatherings, but it seemed impolite to refuse." Deanna nodded in understanding. "I feel somewhat out of place myself, because of your recent loss, partly that, and partly because—" She hesitated, unsure why she was confiding in this near stranger. "I've never quite belonged here. My father moved us from Philadelphia when I was 16, 6 years later, and I'm still the Easterner to many folks." Cole's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I understand that feeling. I've been the outsider in enough towns to recognize the look." Their conversation was interrupted by Reverend Wilson, a kindly older man with snow-white hair and perpetually ink-stained fingers from his sermon writing. "Miss Callaghan, how good to see you," he greeted warmly. "And Mr. Brennan, I'm pleased you could join us." After exchanging pleasantries, the Reverend turned to Deanna with purpose. "Miss Callaghan, I wanted to discuss a matter with you. Our school teacher, Miss Harding, is expecting a child and will be leaving us when she marries next month. The school board is seeking someone to assist her until then and possibly take over afterward." Diana's heart quickened. Teaching had always been her secret ambition, though circumstances had never allowed her to pursue formal training. "I would be very interested, Reverend," she replied carefully. "Though I should be honest, I have no formal qualification as a teacher." "Your education exceeds most in this town," he assured her, "and Miss Harding speaks highly of your assistance with last year's Christmas pageant. Would you be available to meet with the school board next Tuesday?" "Yes, certainly," Deanna agreed, hope rising within her for the first time in weeks. As the Reverend moved on to greet other parishioners, Deanna became aware of Cole watching her, an unreadable expression on his face. "That's wonderful news," he said. "You seem well suited for teaching." "It's just a possibility at this point," she cautioned, though she couldn't keep the excitement from her voice. Their conversation was again interrupted, this time by the unwelcome figure of Randall Hollister. The wealthy rancher approached with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference, his daughter Amelia at his side. "Brennan," he acknowledged curtly before turning to Deanna. "Miss Callaghan, my condolences on your father's passing." "Thank you, Mr. Hollister," Deanna replied stiffly. There was little love lost between her family and the Hollisters, despite Amelia's attempts at friendship over the years. "I understand the bank will be auctioning your property next week," Hollister continued. "A shame your father couldn't make a go of it. That land was never suited for a small operation." Deanna felt heat rising to her cheeks at his barely disguised satisfaction. Before she could respond, Cole stepped slightly forward. "Some might say it depends more on the rancher than the land," he remarked casually. "I've seen successful small spreads on far worse terrain." Hollister's eyes narrowed. "Have you made progress on the rustling problem, Brennan? The association is paying you handsomely for results." "I'm gathering information," Cole replied evenly. "These things take time if done properly." "Time is money, and my money is being stolen with every head of cattle that disappears." Hollister turned back to Deanna. "Perhaps it's for the best that you're finding other employment, Miss Callaghan. Ranching is no life for a woman alone." As Hollister moved away with his daughter, Deanna released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That man has wanted our land since my father bought it. The creek that runs through it feeds his eastern pastures. He's not subtle about it, Cole observed. Was he always so antagonistic toward your father? It grew worse over time, especially after Deanna stopped abruptly. After what? Cole prompted gently. Deanna hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. 2 years ago, my father discovered some of our cattle had been rebranded. The new marks belonged to the Hollister Ranch. Cole's expression sharpened. Did your father report it? To Sheriff Dawson, yes. Who promptly suggested it must have been a mistake. Perhaps our cattle had wandered onto Hollister land and been accidentally included in their roundup. Deanna's voice was bitter. My father insisted on investigating further, but nothing came of it except increased hostility from Hollister. Interesting, Cole murmured, his gaze following Hollister across the room. Very interesting. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly enough, with Diana introducing Cole to various townspeople she thought might provide useful information for his investigation. She found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected, appreciating his quiet intelligence and dry observations about the social dynamics at play. As the gathering began to disperse, Cole offered to walk Deanna back to the boarding house. It's only 2 streets away, she protested mildly. Nevertheless, he insisted. The hour is late. The October night was crisp, stars brilliant in the clear sky above them. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Cole spoke. I'd like to visit your father's ranch before the auction, if you wouldn't object to showing me around. Deanna glanced at him, surprised. For what purpose? I have a theory about the rustling that I'd like to confirm. The location of your property might be significant. It's not my property anymore, Deanna reminded him, a pang of loss accompanying the words. All the same, your knowledge of the land would be valuable. Deanna considered the request. There was nothing left for her at the ranch except memories, many of them painful, yet she found herself nodding. Very well, I'm free on Sunday afternoon. Thank you. Cole hesitated before adding, I'm sorry if Hollister upset you this evening. I'm accustomed to his manner, Deanna replied, though I appreciate your intervention. They had reached the boarding house where a lamp still burned in the front window. Deanna turned to face Cole, suddenly aware of how closely he stood. Thank you for escorting me, Mr. Brennan. Cole, he corrected gently. And it was my pleasure, Miss Callaghan. Deanna, she offered in return, surprising herself. A smile warmed his features, transforming his weathered face. Good night then, Deanna. Sleep well. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky. For the first time since her father's death, Deanna felt something other than grief and anxiety, a small spark of interest in what tomorrow might bring. Sunday dawned clear and mild, a perfect late October day. Deanna dressed practically in her sturdiest skirt and boots, with a warm shawl for the afternoon ride. Cole had arranged to borrow horses from the livery stable, and he was waiting when Deanna emerged from the boarding house after the midday meal. Ready? He asked, helping her mount a gentle-looking bay mare. Deanna settled into the saddle, appreciating the familiar feel after weeks away from horseback. Yes, though I must warn you it won't be easy returning to the ranch. Cole's eyes softened with understanding. We can turn back at any time. The ride took nearly an hour, following the main road north before branching onto a smaller trail that wound through rolling hills. As they crested the final rise, the Callaghan ranch came into view, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, nestled in a shallow valley with a creek running along its eastern edge. Diana reined in her horse, momentarily overwhelmed by memories. The garden her father had helped her plant in the spring. The porch where they'd sat on summer evenings. The barn where she'd nursed a sick calf through a bitter winter night. Take your time, Cole said quietly, stopping beside her. After a deep breath, Deanna nudged her horse forward. It's not much to look at, but it was home. They rode down to the cabin, which stood empty and forlorn. Deanna dismounted and tied her horse to the hitching post, then stood uncertainly before the door. "May I?" Cole asked, gesturing toward the lock. Deanna nodded, handing him the key she'd kept despite knowing she would never return to live here. Cole opened the door gently, then stepped back to let her enter first. Inside, the cabin was much as they had left its simple furniture, a stone fireplace, her father's chair by the window where he'd enjoyed his evening pipe. Deanna moved through the space slowly, touching familiar objects, absorbing the finality of her loss. "He built most of this furniture himself," she told Cole, who had followed her in but maintained a respectful distance. "He wasn't trained as a carpenter, but he learned quickly." "A man of many talents," Cole observed. "Necessity teaches quickly out here." Deanna turned to face him. "You didn't come to hear about my father's woodworking skills. What are you looking for?" Cole nodded, acknowledging her directness. "I'd like to examine the property boundaries, particularly where your land meets Hollister's." They left the cabin and remounted, with Deanna leading the way along the creek that formed the eastern boundary. After about 20 minutes of riding, she pointed to a post marking the property line. "This is where our land ends and Hollister's begins," she explained. "The creek continues through his property for another mile or so before joining the river." Cole dismounted and examined the boundary marker carefully, then walked along the creek bank, studying the ground. Deanna watched, puzzled by his intense scrutiny of what appeared to be ordinary terrain. "What exactly are you looking for?" she finally asked. Cole looked up, considering his response. "Cattle trails, signs of regular movement." He pointed to a worn path leading from the creek into a stand of cottonwoods. "Like that one there," Deanna frowned. "That's always been there." "Animals come to the creek to drink." "Yes, but notice how it curves around rather than going directly to the water." Cole led his horse toward the path. "May I?" "Of course." They followed the trail into the trees, which grew thicker as they progressed. After about 5 minutes, the path widened into a small clearing, then continued northward. "This isn't on your property anymore, is it?" Cole asked. Deanna shook her head. "No, we're on Hollister land now." Cole dismounted again and examined the ground carefully. "Look here," he said, pointing to several sets of hoof prints. "These are recent, within the last few days." "There's nothing unusual about cattle moving through here," Deanna pointed out. "True, but these aren't grazing patterns." Cole traced the direction of the tracks. These animals were being driven, and with purpose. They remounted and continued following the trail, which wound through increasingly rough terrain before emerging onto a plateau overlooking a secluded valley. Cole reined in sharply, motioning for Deanna to stay back. Below them, nestled against a rocky outcropping, stood a small cabin with a corral containing perhaps 24 cattle. 2 men moved around the structure, apparently preparing to brand an animal held in a makeshift chute. "Stay here," Cole whispered, dismounting and tethering his horse to a tree. He removed a spyglass from his saddlebag and crawled forward to the edge of the plateau. After several minutes of observation, he returned to Deanna, his expression grim. "They're rebranding stolen cattle. I can see at least 3 different original marks on those animals." "Are they Hollister's men?" Deanna asked, her heart pounding. "One of them is. The foreman, Jackson, I believe his name is." Cole's voice was tight. "We need to leave. Now." They retreated quickly, riding in silence until they were safely back on Callaghan property. Once they reached the cabin, Cole finally spoke. "I need to report this to Sheriff Dawson, though I doubt he'll act without pressure from the Cattlemen's Association." "Will he believe you?" Deanna asked. Hollister has considerable influence. Evidence speaks for itself. And I'm not without resources. Cole's jaw was set in determination. This explains the pattern of the rustling targeting smaller ranches near Hollister's boundaries, then moving the cattle through connected properties to avoid detection. Diana's mind was racing. Is Hollister behind it, do you think? I can't say for certain yet, but his foreman's involvement suggests at least some knowledge. Cole turned to her, his expression softening. Thank you for bringing me here. This is exactly what I needed to see. My father suspected something like this, Deanna admitted. That's why relations with Hollister deteriorated so badly. He was getting too close to the truth. Cole's eyes narrowed. Do you think your father's death was natural? Deanna interrupted firmly. He had a weak heart for years. The doctor wasn't surprised. Cole nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. We should head back to town before we're missed. The return journey was faster, driven by Cole's evident urgency to report his findings. As they approached Timber Creek, however, he slowed their pace. Deanna, he began, using her first name with a careful formality, what I discovered today could cause significant trouble. Hollister won't take accusations lightly, especially from an outsider. I understand, she replied. You're warning me to be careful. Yes. It might be best if your involvement remains private for now. Deanna straightened in her saddle. I'm not afraid of Randall Hollister. My father wouldn't have wanted me to hide from the truth. Cole studied her for a moment, admiration evident in his gaze. No, I don't imagine he would have. He hesitated before adding, Still, there's no need to put yourself at risk unnecessarily. Let me handle this part. They had reached the livery stable. As Cole helped Deanna dismount, his hands lingered at her waist slightly longer than necessary. The contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite the seriousness of their conversation. Thank you for today, he said quietly. You've been more helpful than you know. Will you tell me what happens next? Deanna asked. Of course. Cole's expression was troubled. But please, be careful. Hollister has eyes and ears throughout town. As they parted ways at the boarding house, Deanna couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between them. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, a stranger offering to walk her home from her father's funeral, had evolved into something more complex and potentially dangerous. That evening, Deanna sat by her window, watching the street below as darkness fell. She saw Cole leave the boarding house and head toward the sheriff's office, his stride purposeful. An hour later, he returned, accompanied by another man she didn't recognize, tall and lean, wearing a long coat despite the mild evening. The following morning at breakfast, Mrs. Winthrop was bubbling with news. Did you hear? Sheriff Dawson and some men rode out to Hollister's ranch at dawn. They arrested his foreman, Jackson, for cattle rustling. Diana maintained a neutral expression. That's quite dramatic. What evidence did they have? That's the mysterious part, Mrs. Winthrop confided, leaning closer. Apparently that man staying here, Mr. Brennan, led them to some hidden corral where they found stolen cattle, including, they say, some that belonged to your father's ranch. Deanna's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. How extraordinary. Hollister is furious, of course, claims he knew nothing about it. Mrs. Winthrop shook her head skeptically, as if his right-hand man could run such an operation without his knowledge. Deanna excused herself to prepare for her interview with the school board, her mind whirling with this development. She had just finished dressing when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Cole standing in the hallway, his expression grave. "May I speak with you briefly?" he asked. Deanna stepped back to allow him entry, leaving the door ajar for propriety's sake. "I heard about the arrest. Congratulations." "It's only the beginning," Cole replied, his voice low. "Jackson is talking, trying to save himself. He claims he was acting on Hollister's direct orders." "Will that be enough to arrest Hollister?" "Not yet. We need more evidence." Cole ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. "But that's not why I'm here. Hollister knows we visited your father's ranch yesterday. He's making threats." Deanna felt a chill run through her. "What kind of threats?" "Nothing direct, he's too clever for that. But he's suggesting that you and I conspired to frame his foreman out of some personal vendetta." "That's absurd," Deanna exclaimed. "I barely know you." A flicker of something hurt crossed Cole's face before his expression returned to professional concern. "Nevertheless, be careful. Don't go anywhere alone for the next few days." "I have an interview with the school board this morning," Deanna protested. "I'll escort you there and back," Cole stated firmly. "After that, we'll see how the situation develops." Despite her instinctive resistance to being protected, Deanna recognized the wisdom in his caution. "Very well, but please understand I won't be intimidated into hiding." A smile touched Cole's lips. "I never thought you would be. Your courage is remarkable." The compliment caught Deanna off guard, bringing warmth to her cheeks. "Thank you for the warning," she said, changing the subject. "I should finish preparing for my interview." Cole nodded and moved toward the door. "I'll wait downstairs." The interview with the school board went well, with Deanna impressing them with her knowledge and obvious enthusiasm for education. By the time she emerged from the small schoolhouse, she had been offered the position of teaching assistant, with the possibility of assuming full teaching duties when Miss Harding departed. Cole was waiting outside as promised, leaning against a hitching post with the relaxed posture of a man accustomed to long periods of vigilance. His face brightened when he saw Deanna's smile. "Good news, I take it." "They offered me the position," she confirmed, unable to contain her excitement. "I start tomorrow, assisting Miss Harding with the younger children." "Congratulations," Cole said warmly. "You'll make an excellent teacher." They began walking back toward the center of town, Deanna sharing details of the curriculum she would be helping to teach. Cole listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that revealed his own surprisingly comprehensive education. Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by the sight of Randall Hollister emerging from the bank, his face thunderous. When he spotted Deanna and Cole, he altered his course to intercept them. "Brennan," he growled, "you've made a serious mistake targeting my operation." Cole stepped slightly in front of Deanna. "The evidence speaks for itself, Hollister." "Evidence can be manufactured," Hollister retorted. "Especially when there's personal motivation." His gaze shifted to Deanna. "Miss Callaghan certainly has reason to want to see me ruined after her father's failures." "My father was an honest man," Deanna said firmly, "something you might not recognize." Hollister's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Be careful, young lady. Slander is a serious matter." "So is cattle rustling," Cole interjected, "and threatening witnesses." Several townspeople had stopped to observe the confrontation, creating an impromptu audience that seemed to cool Hollister's temper slightly. "This isn't over," he said quietly before striding away. Cole placed a steadying hand at Deanna's elbow. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she replied, though her heart was racing. "He's more frightened than he wants to admit, with good reason. His foreman has been talking all morning." Cole guided her toward the boarding house. "But Hollister is dangerous when cornered. I've asked a friend to keep watch over the boarding house tonight." "Is that really necessary?" Deanna asked, though the confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. "I hope not," Cole replied. "But I'd rather be overly cautious than regretful later." That evening, Deanna caught glimpses of a man she didn't recognize positioned across the street, occasionally visible in the glow of his cigarette. The presence of this unknown guard should have been unsettling, but instead, she found it oddly comforting tangible proof that Cole was concerned for her safety. As she prepared for bed, there was a soft knock at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Mrs. Winthrop holding a sealed envelope. "This was just delivered for you, dear," the older woman explained. "A boy brought it to the kitchen door." Diana thanked her and closed the door before breaking the plain wax seal. The note inside was brief. "Miss Callaghan, I have information regarding your father's death that may interest you. Meet me at your father's ranch tomorrow at noon if you wish to learn the truth. Come alone or I will not reveal myself. A friend." Diana read the note several times, her hands trembling. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the message deliberately vague yet enticing. Could someone truly know something about her father's death that she didn't? The doctor had been clear that it was heart failure, a natural, if premature, end. Her first instinct was to show the note to Cole, but something held her back. He would undoubtedly forbid her from going, seeing it as an obvious trap. Yet if there was even the slightest chance that someone had information about her father. Diana placed the note in her drawer and prepared for bed, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. By morning, she had made her decision. She would go, but not without taking precautions. After breakfast, Diana informed Mrs. Winthrop that she needed to visit her father's ranch one last time before the auction to collect some personal items. The older woman looked concerned. "Alone? With Hollister making threats? I don't think that's wise, dear." "I'll be perfectly safe in daylight," Diana assured her, "and I'll take the main road where there are always travelers." Mrs. Winthrop remained dubious but didn't forbid the excursion. "At least let me pack you some lunch." Diana accepted the offer gratefully, knowing it would help explain her absence during the midday meal. She had deliberately chosen a time when Cole would be meeting with Sheriff Dawson and the Cattlemen's Association, making it less likely he would discover her plans. At the livery stable, Diana rented the same gentle mare she had ridden previously, explaining that she needed to collect belongings from her father's property. The stableman seemed hesitant until she mentioned that she had Sheriff Dawson's permission, a small lie that she justified by the importance of her mission. The ride to the ranch was tense, with Diana constantly scanning her surroundings for any sign of pursuit or ambush. She arrived shortly before noon, approaching the cabin cautiously. Nothing seemed disturbed since her visit with Cole. Diana dismounted and tied her horse to the hitching post, then stood in the yard, uncertain what to do next. The note hadn't specified where to meet this mysterious informant. "Hello," she called. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered her. Diana moved toward the cabin, her nerves increasing with each step. As she reached for the door, a voice spoke from behind her. "Miss Callaghan, thank you for coming." Diana whirled around to find Jackson, Hollister's former foreman, emerging from behind the barn. He looked haggard, his clothes dirty, his face unshaven. "You," Diana gasped, instinctively stepping back. "You're supposed to be in jail." "I escaped last night," Jackson replied, approaching slowly with his hands held open to show he was unarmed. "But not before I heard things about your father." Diana's back was against the cabin door now. "What things?" "Hollister didn't just steal your cattle," Jackson said. "He poisoned your father." The accusation struck Diana like a physical blow. "That's impossible. My father died of heart failure, caused by a special mixture untraceable, looks like natural causes." Jackson's eyes darted nervously around the property. "Hollister had me deliver it, disguised as a peace offering. A bottle of whiskey." Diana remembered the bottle, a gesture that had surprised her father, coming as it did after months of hostility. He had consumed it gradually over several weeks before his final, fatal collapse. "Why are you telling me this?" she demanded, fighting back tears. "Because Hollister plans to kill me too," Jackson replied bitterly. "I know too much. My only hope is to expose him first." Before Deanna could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the silence. Jackson's face contorted with fear. "They've found me," he hissed. "Hide." But it was too late. 4 riders appeared at the edge of the property, Hollister himself, accompanied by 3 of his men. They fanned out, blocking any escape route. "Well, well," Hollister called. "Jackson and Miss Callaghan having a private meeting. How convenient." Diana's mind raced desperately. This had been a trap after all, but not the one she had feared. Jackson hadn't lured her here, they had both been manipulated into a compromising situation. "Stay back," she warned, though she had no weapon and no real means of defense. Hollister dismounted leisurely. "No need for alarm, Miss Callaghan. We're simply here to return an escaped prisoner to jail." His smile was cold. "Though finding you here, conspiring with him, raises interesting questions about your involvement in this whole affair." "I'm not conspiring with anyone," Deanna protested. "He contacted me with information about my father's death." "Did he now?" Hollister's gaze shifted to Jackson, who had backed against the barn wall. "And what tales has he been spinning?" Before Jackson could respond, the distinctive sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the tension. All heads turned toward the source. Cole Brennan, mounted on his chestnut gelding at the edge of the clearing, his rifle aimed steadily at Hollister. "That's far enough," Cole called. "Sheriff Dawson and his deputies are right behind me. Drop your weapons." Hollister's men hesitated, looking to their employer for direction. Hollister himself remained outwardly calm, though Deanna could see the calculation in his eyes. "This is a misunderstanding, Brennan," he said smoothly. "We're simply apprehending an escaped prisoner, with 3 armed men." Cole's voice was hard. "Step away from Miss Callaghan and Jackson. Now." For a moment, Deanna thought Hollister might defy the order. Then, slowly, he raised his hands and backed away. His men followed suit, dropping their guns to the ground. As if on cue, Sheriff Dawson and 2 deputies rode into the clearing, quickly moving to secure Hollister and his men. Cole dismounted and strode directly to Deanna, his face tight with controlled fear and anger. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, grasping her shoulders gently. "No," she managed, her voice shaking. "How did you know to come? Mrs. Winthrop showed me the note after you left." Cole's hands tightened slightly. "Do you have any idea how dangerous this was? What were you thinking?" "I had to know," Deanna whispered. "About my father." Cole's expression softened slightly. "Let's get you home. We can discuss this later." As Sheriff Dawson's men led the prisoners away, Jackson included, Deanna found herself trembling with delayed shock. Cole wrapped his coat around her shoulders and helped her mount her horse. The ride back to town passed in relative silence, Deanna too overwhelmed to speak and Cole seemingly content to let her process the events. It was only when they reached the boarding house that he finally broke the silence. "Jackson's story about your father," he said carefully as he helped her dismount. "Do you believe it?" Deanna hesitated. "I don't know. It seems incredible, and yet, the timing of the gift, my father's sudden decline." She looked up at Cole, her eyes filling with tears. "Is there any way to prove it?" "Possibly," Cole replied. "The doctor might have preserved samples, and there are tests that can detect certain poisons even after death." He guided her gently toward the boarding house steps. "But that's for tomorrow. Right now you need rest." Deanna nodded, suddenly exhausted. "Will you come in? There's something I need to tell you." Inside, Mrs. Winthrop fussed over Deanna briefly before Cole assured her that everything was under control. They moved to the small parlor, which was mercifully empty of other boarders at this hour. Once they were seated, Deanna gathered her courage. "I need to apologize for not showing you the note immediately. It was foolish and reckless." "Yes, it was," Cole agreed, his directness softened by the concern in his eyes. "But I understand why you went. If someone offered me information about my family, I might have done the same." "Your family?" Deanna prompted gently, realizing she knew almost nothing about his personal history. A shadow crossed Cole's face. "My parents and sister were killed in a Comanche raid when I was 17. I wasn't there. I'd gone to the neighboring ranch for supplies." He looked down at his hands. "I've spent years wondering if I could have saved them had I been home." "I'm so sorry," Deanna whispered, instinctively reaching out to touch his arm. "That's a terrible burden to carry." Cole covered her hand with his own. "The point is, I understand the pull of family ties even beyond death. But Deanna, please, no more solitary heroics. Whatever we face together." The "we" caught her attention, warming something inside her that had been cold since her father's death. For the first time, she truly looked at the man before her not just as the stranger who had offered to walk her home from a funeral, but as someone who had steadily become important to her. "Together," she agreed softly. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Sheriff Dawson, under pressure from the territorial governor alerted by Cole's mysterious friend, conducted a thorough investigation into Hollister's activities. Jackson testified against his former employer in exchange for leniency, confirming that Hollister had orchestrated the rustling operation for years. The whiskey bottle accusation proved harder to verify, as no physical evidence remained. However, when faced with mounting evidence of his other crimes, Hollister eventually confessed to ordering Deanna's father's poisoning, seeing it as a necessary step to acquiring the strategically valuable Callaghan property. Throughout the proceedings, Cole remained by Deanna's side, offering quiet support and practical assistance. When Deanna was overwhelmed by testimony about her father's murder, it was Cole's steady presence that gave her strength to continue. In early December, 6 weeks after her father's funeral, Deanna stood in the small classroom where she now taught full-time, arranging decorations for the upcoming Christmas pageant. The door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Cole Brennan, his coat dusted with snow. "Miss Callaghan," he greeted her formally, aware that 2 older students were helping with the decorations. "May I speak with you when you're finished here?" Deanna nodded, her heart quickening as it always did in his presence. "Of course. We're nearly done for the day." After dismissing her helpers, Deanna turned to Cole expectantly. "What brings you to the schoolhouse? I thought you were meeting with the Cattlemen's Association." "I was." Cole removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands, an uncharacteristic gesture for someone usually so composed. "They've offered me a permanent position as security consultant for the territory." "That's wonderful news," Deanna exclaimed. "Congratulations." "Thank you." Cole hesitated before continuing. "It would mean staying in Timber Creek indefinitely." Deanna busied herself with adjusting a paper star, trying to hide the hope blooming within her. "And will you accept?" "That depends." Cole moved closer, gently turning her to face him. "Deanna, these past weeks have been the most meaningful of my life, not because of the case but because of you." Deanna's breath caught in her throat. "Cole, please, let me finish." His eyes held hers intently. "I came to Timber Creek to solve a mystery. I never expected to find someone who would change how I see my future, someone brave and intelligent and kind." He took her hands in his. "I know it's soon. I know you're still grieving. But I want you to know that I've fallen in love with you, Deanna Callaghan. And if there's any chance you might someday return those feelings, I'll accept that position and stay here as long as you'll have me." Diana felt tears welling in her eyes, but they were different from the tears of grief she'd shed so often recently. These were tears of possibility, of future, of hope. "It is soon," she agreed softly. "Too soon, perhaps, for promises. But not too soon for me to tell you that you've brought light back into my life when I thought there would only be darkness." She squeezed his hands. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to discover it with you beside me." Cole's face transformed with joy. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Diana responded with a certainty that surprised her, her hands moving to rest against his chest. When they parted, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably court you properly before doing that again," he murmured. Diana laughed softly. "I think we're well past traditional courtship, given that you've already saved my life and helped bring my father's murderer to justice." "Even so," Cole insisted, stepping back respectfully. "You deserve to be wooed properly. Dinner at the hotel restaurant tomorrow evening." "I'd like that," Diana agreed, already missing his closeness. As they left the schoolhouse together, snow beginning to fall more heavily around them, Diana reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 months ago, she had stood alone at her father's grave, certain that her life in Timber Creek was ending. Now, improbably, a new chapter was beginning, one filled with purpose, justice, and the tentative first blooms of love. Cole offered his arm as they navigated the snowy street. "May I walk you home, Miss Callaghan?" Diana smiled, taking his arm and leaning slightly into his solid warmth. "Always, Mr. Brennan. Always." The winter months passed in a whirlwind of activity and cautious courtship. Diana's position as the town's schoolteacher became permanent, earning her the respect of the community and a modest but reliable income. Cole established himself as an indispensable advisor to the Cattlemen's Association, implementing new security measures that dramatically reduced cattle theft throughout the territory. By spring, their courtship had become the town's most discussed romance, with Mrs. Winthrop proudly taking credit for hosting the couple's first meeting. Though Diana sometimes felt the progression of their relationship was watched too closely by the town's eager eyes, she couldn't deny the joy that had returned to her life. On a warm evening in late April, Cole invited Diana for a ride to her father's former property. The land had been purchased by the Cattlemen's Association after Hollister's arrest, as part of the restitution ordered by the territorial court. It had remained largely untouched since then, awaiting decisions about its future use. "It's beautiful in spring," Diana commented as they rode side by side through the lush green valley. Wildflowers dotted the meadows, and the creek burbled merrily along its course. "It is," Cole agreed, guiding his horse toward the cabin, which had been repaired and maintained, though unoccupied. They dismounted near the porch, and Cole surprised Diana by producing a picnic basket from his saddlebag. "I thought we might have dinner here if that's all right with you." Diana smiled, touched by his thoughtfulness and sensitivity. "I'd like that. It feels good to be here without sadness clouding everything." They settled on the porch with their simple meal, watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The air was filled with the scent of new growth and promise. "I've been thinking about this place," Cole said after they had eaten, "about what should happen to it." "Oh," Diana raised an eyebrow. "Has the association made a decision?" "Not exactly." Cole reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. "This is the deed to the property. It's been transferred to your name." Diana stared at him in shock. "What? How is that possible?" "The association agreed that the property was rightfully yours, stolen through Hollister's criminal actions. They've returned it to you, free and clear." Cole handed her the deed. "Your father's land is yours again, Deanna." Tears filled her eyes as she took the document with trembling hands. "I don't know what to say. This is incredible." "There's more," Cole said quietly. "I've spoken with several investors who are interested in establishing a proper school building in Timber Creek. The current arrangement in the church basement isn't adequate for the growing number of children." Deanna nodded, wiping away her tears. "Miss Harding said the same thing before she left. We need a dedicated schoolhouse." "You could sell a portion of this land to fund it," Cole suggested. "Keep the cabin and enough acreage for a small homestead, but use the rest to build something lasting for the town, something with your father's name on it." "The Callaghan school," Deanna murmured, imagining the possibility. He would have liked that. Education was always important to him. Cole took her hand, his expression growing serious. "There's one more thing, Deanna, the most important thing." He reached into his pocket again and withdrew a small velvet box. Deanna's heart began to race as he moved to kneel before her. "I promised myself I would court you properly, give you time to heal and be certain of your feelings," Cole said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I wake each morning grateful that I was there to walk you home that day, and I want to walk beside you for all the days to come." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a single perfect diamond. "Deanna Callaghan, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Deanna looked from the ring to the man before her, the stranger who had offered comfort when she needed it most, who had helped bring justice for her father, who had shown her that life could contain joy even after devastating loss. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Cole. I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to gather her in his arms. Their kiss was filled with promise and certainty, sealing a bond that had been forming since that first meeting at her father's graveside. As they broke apart, Cole kept his arms around her. "I thought perhaps a June wedding, unless that's too soon." Deanna laughed, resting her head against his chest. "June would be perfect. Where will we live?" "That's for you to decide," Cole replied. "We could stay at the boarding house until we build something of our own. Or," he hesitated, "we could live here if you'd like. I know your father's memory is strong in this place that could be either a comfort or a burden." Deanna looked around at the land that had been her home, seeing it now not just as a place of past grief, but of future possibility. "I think he would want us to make it our own, to build something new while honoring what came before." "Then that's what we'll do," Cole agreed, kissing her forehead gently. They remained on the porch as twilight descended, planning their future together: the wedding, the school, the home they would create. When the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. As Cole helped Deanna mount her horse, he looked up at her with a tender smile. "Ready to go home? I believe we have some news to share with Mrs. Winthrop." Deanna laughed, imagining the landlady's excitement. "She'll be insufferable, you know, taking credit for the whole romance." "Let her," Cole replied, mounting his own horse. "In a way, she's right. If you hadn't been staying there, I might never have found the courage to speak to you that first day." They rode back toward Timber Creek side by side, the setting sun casting long shadows before them. Deanna glanced at her companion, soon to be her husband, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. She had been alone after burying her father, until a cowboy said, "I'll walk you back." And in that simple act of kindness, a new path had opened before her, one she would never have to walk alone again. June arrived with perfect weather for a wedding, clear blue skies, and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers through the open windows of the church. Deanna stood in the small anteroom, her hands trembling slightly as Mrs. Winthrop adjusted the simple veil atop her dark hair. "You look beautiful, my dear," the older woman said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud." Deanna smiled, smoothing the ivory satin of her gown ordered from Denver and delivered just 3 days earlier. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Winthrop, for taking me in when I had nowhere else to go, and for—" she laughed softly, "for helping Cole and me find each other." "Oh, pish, Mrs. Winthrop replied, though her pleased expression belied her dismissive tone. "Anyone with eyes could see you two were meant for each other. I simply provided opportunities for those eyes to meet." A knock at the door announced Reverend Wilson. "It's time, Miss Callaghan. Are you ready?" Deanna took a deep breath. "Yes, I'm ready." The small church was filled to capacity, the entire town having turned out for the wedding of their schoolteacher to the man who had brought justice to Timber Creek. As the organ began to play and Deanna walked slowly down the aisle, her gaze found Cole waiting at the altar. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his face transforming with awe and love as he watched her approach. In that moment, any lingering doubts Deanna might have harbored dissolved completely. This was right. This was her future. With no father to give her away, Deanna had chosen to walk alone, a symbol of the independence she had found, and the choice she was making freely. As she reached Cole's side, he whispered, "You're breathtaking," before taking her hand in his. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They exchanged traditional vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever life might bring. When Reverend Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Cole's kiss was tender yet filled with promise, bringing applause and a few good-natured cheers from the congregation. The celebration afterwards spilled from the church into the town square, where tables had been set up and decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was food and music, dancing and laughter that continued well into the evening. As the sun began to set, Cole found Deanna speaking with some of her students. "Mrs. Brennan," he said, the new name bringing a smile to both their faces, "our carriage is ready whenever you are." They had decided to spend their wedding night at their cabin, now repaired and furnished as their new home rather than at the hotel as was customary. It felt right to begin their married life in the place that had brought them together, now transformed from a site of loss to one of new beginnings. After bidding farewell to their guests, they rode in the flower-decorated carriage to the edge of town, where Cole surprised Deanna by stopping and helping her down. "I thought we might walk the rest of the way," he suggested with a smile, "for old time's sake." Deanna laughed, understanding the reference to their first meeting. "You're a sentimental man, Cole Brennan." "Only with you," he replied, offering his arm. They walked slowly along the moonlit road, savoring the quiet after the festivities of the day. When they reached the cabin, warm light glowed from the windows Mrs. Winthrop's doing. Deanna suspected, as the older woman had insisted on preparing the house for their arrival. Cole paused at the threshold, then swept Deanna into his arms with surprising strength. "Tradition demands it," he explained as he carried her through the doorway. Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, new furniture graced the main room, and flowers adorned every surface. A fire burned low in the hearth, taking the chill from the evening air. Cole set Deanna gently on her feet but kept his arms around her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan." "It's perfect," she whispered, looking around at what they had created together. The cabin retained its rustic charm, but now held touches of refinement: books on shelves, a comfortable sofa, a dining table set for two with their wedding china. "Are you happy?" Cole asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Diana turned in his arms to face him fully. Happier than I ever thought possible after my father died. You gave me back hope, Cole, and now you've given me a future I can't wait to build with you. His kiss was different this time, deeper, more passionate, with none of the restraint that had characterized their courtship. Diana responded in kind, her arms winding around his neck as she surrendered to the love she felt for this man who had changed her life so completely. Later, as they lay entwined in the moonlight filtering through the bedroom window, Cole traced gentle patterns on Diana's bare shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. Diana smiled, her head resting on his chest where she could hear the steady beat of his heart. "I was thinking about fate, about how the darkest day of my life led me to you." "I've thought about that too," Cole admitted. "If I hadn't decided to attend a stranger's funeral, if I hadn't spoken to you that day." He shook his head. "Sometimes the smallest decisions change everything. Or perhaps it was always meant to be," Diana suggested. "Perhaps we would have found each other somehow, even if not on that particular day." Cole's arms tightened around her. "I like to think so, that some things are written in the stars long before we understand them." They fell silent, content in their closeness and the promise of days to come. As Diana drifted toward sleep, she felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The grief of loss would always be part of her story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. Now, in the arms of the man she loved, a new story was beginning, one filled with hope, purpose, and the deep certainty that she would never walk alone again. Years passed, each season bringing new joys and challenges to the Brennan household. The Callaghan School was built in the center of Timber Creek, a handsome brick building that quickly became the pride of the community. Diana continued teaching, her natural gift for education enhanced by her genuine care for each student. Cole's reputation as a fair and effective security consultant spread throughout the territory, bringing requests for his services from as far away as Cheyenne and Denver. Though he occasionally traveled for work, he always returned eagerly to the home and family he had established in Timber Creek. In the spring of 1878, their family grew with the birth of a son, whom they named James after Diana's father. 2 years later, a daughter followed, Emily, with her father's chestnut hair and her mother's determined spirit. The cabin expanded as well, with Cole adding rooms as their family and prosperity increased. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Cole surprised Diana with a special gift, a locket containing miniature portraits of their children, with space on the reverse for one of the two of them. "We'll have a photographer take our picture when one next comes through town," Cole promised as he fastened the gold chain around her neck. Diana touched the locket gently. "It's beautiful, Cole. Thank you." They sat together on the porch swing he had built the previous summer, watching 4-year-old James and 2-year-old Emily playing in the yard under the watchful eye of Mrs. Winthrop, who had become an honorary grandmother to the children. "Are you happy with the life we've built?" Cole asked, his arm around Diana's shoulders. She leaned into him, her head finding its familiar place against his chest. "More than happy," she assured him. "Though sometimes I can hardly believe how much has changed in 5 years. All for the better, I hope, of course." Diana looked up at him, noting the new strands of silver at his temples that only enhanced his handsome features. "Though I do miss having you all to myself sometimes." Cole's eyes darkened with familiar desire. "The children will be asleep early tonight, and Mrs. Winthrop mentioned taking them to town tomorrow for the Independence Day preparations." "Did she now?" Diana smiled mischievously. "How convenient." Their playful conversation was interrupted by James running toward them, his face alight with excitement. "Papa, there's a rabbit in the garden." "Can I try to catch it?" Cole laughed, lifting his son onto his lap. "Rabbits are very fast, son, but we can try if you'd like." As Cole set off with James to investigate the garden visitor, Emily toddled up the porch steps to claim her mother's attention. Deanna gathered her daughter close, inhaling the sweet scent of her hair and marveling at the perfect little person she and Cole had created together. Mrs. Winthrop joined her on the porch, lowering herself carefully onto the swing. "You've made a beautiful life here, Deanna. Your father would be so proud." Deanna nodded, watching as Cole knelt beside James to point out the rabbit's tracks. "Yes, I think he would be. Not just of me, but of what the town has become, the school, the new families moving in, the sense of community." "And it all started with a simple act of kindness," Mrs. Winthrop mused. "A stranger offering to walk a grieving daughter home." Deanna smiled, her hand unconsciously finding the locket at her throat. "The best journeys often begin with a single step," she agreed. "I'm just grateful mine was taken beside someone who would walk with me for all the rest." As the sunset painted the Wyoming sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Deanna Brennan looked out over the land that had once represented her greatest loss and now embodied her greatest joy. The path from grief to happiness had been neither straight nor easy, but every step had led her here to this moment, this family, this love that had transformed everything. Cole returned to the porch with James on his shoulders, the rabbit hunt apparently abandoned in favor of horseplay. His eyes met Deanna's across the yard, and the look they exchanged held all the warmth and promise of that first evening when he had said, "I'll walk you back." Some journeys, Deanna reflected as her family gathered around her, truly did last a lifetime, and she wouldn't have it any other way.